helped nurture me in the faith. She was an amazing older sister. She was in youth group with me at mission trips, and you know, introduced me to taking faith seriously as I watched her take her own faith seriously. So um, I asked her if she would be a part of this conversation, and if she had read our book that we're doing, and she had read it. I think it sounds like a long time ago. Uh, Austin Chaney Brown's book had been out there, and it didn't really catch on until last year. And now through speaking events, I'm gonna mute everybody, uh, mute all, and then Anna, I am gonna unmute. I'm gonna give you the ability to unmute. Okay. Um, so let's open with prayer, and then we'll start our conversation. Oh God, we give you thanks for a Sabbath day, a day to slow down, to listen for guidance, and to be comforted, and to be challenged, and to hold fast to what is good, and to recommit ourselves to seeking your will and your will alone. Might our conversation bless all gathered with insight, and might we be so brave to live into what we learn. In Christ's name, amen. So again, welcome everybody. Anna MacArthur went to Columbia Seminary, Clemson before that, and is a fantastic writer. Her blog is Love Means Showing Up, and you can visit it at just by typing in her name, www.annamacarthur.com. Anna, I often share your blogs on Facebook. I think they're poignant, and you keep them tight, and you even have humor in there. You do, even if it's a really painful subject, and there's also a rawness and vulnerability that takes some courage to do, to put yourself out there. And this conversation, because you're not just joining it from academia or the viewpoint as a scholar, but also as somebody whose conversations at home about race are different than most of us. I, Anna and Brian, her husband Brian, had Caroline and Caleb, who are they're probably like 19 and a half and 18, and then when they were almost 8, something like that, they adopted twins, and got the twins when they were 6 days old, because they did, didn't think it'd be much of a challenge, so that's what they did.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let me start by correcting you, because only some of that is true.
I'm just kind of making stuff up. I didn't want you to have to be like, so how, yeah, anyways, you go ahead.
I'll do it. So we adopted the twins when they were a month old, but they were still in the hospital. So we've had them since the hospital. They were born at 30 weeks. And so they were in the NICU for a month. And we didn't know about them until a couple of days before we got them. We had been in the adoption process, but had switched over to an attorney, and found out about them very quickly. And it was a really, really fast adoption. And it changed our family. It changed my household, and just the lens through which we view pretty much everything. Because the girls are African American, and we did not realize how white we were until we were in it.
Hey, why do you think it's so, like, why I'm so hesitant, and there's just perhaps it's a sensitivity, but it feels like so close to the edge of raising the difference, right? By saying, and they're black. Like, it just, but at the same time, the age of color blindness is being, like, we're repenting from this idea that race doesn't matter. Because the truth is it is very different. And let's talk about a few of those things. Why it is very different to grow up black in America. And of course, the book we're reading is I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. So I want to talk about that, like, made for whiteness, and how it became easier to see, or glaringly obvious, when your family included the girls. So
I think sometimes people are hesitant, and I understand it, because I want to be really clear that, I have biological children and adopted children, but they're all my children. And the twins are not a mission trip for me. So I don't want to, I think, there have been times where we've literally been at a basketball game and a white person has stopped me to thank me for saving the twins. And that, it's just so uncomfortable and so colonial. It's just hard. So I think sometimes we're hesitant to, acknowledge that difference within our family, because we have been blessed by it more than they have. And I want to be really clear that this is not, a mission trip, that these are our children. And I think, I think the first clue that we were going to learn a lot was when we started looking into the adoption process and realized that there are different fees and there are different price kind of points through the attorney based on the race of the child you're going to adopt. So it is more expensive to adopt a white child than to adopt a black child. And the court fees and the attorney fees and the birth mother expenses are not different. It is an issue of, like, incentivizing people to adopt children of color. It's kind of subsidizing adopting white children. So that very system was our first clue that we were going to learn a lot about systemic racism, not just about raising individual black children.
Right. So a lot of the structures that we talk about when we say systemic racism, on the surface, are seemingly benign and sometimes even well-intentioned, but cumulatively, the message again, or over and over again, is that black children, black women, black men are not valued as much. Like, that's there, right? I understand the motivation, but it's, you can, I don't know, maybe not, maybe that's a stretch, but.
Well, I think, there've been multiple times, so where I don't even realize I should have given my kids some background when we get to a place. So, like, one Martin Luther King Day, we all met at this church, and then went out and did different projects. And we were helping at an African-American cemetery, and the twins were in elementary school. And, they had some questions about why that cemetery only had African-Americans in it. I had not given them enough background on that. And then also why it was behind a middle school and unmarked graves and nobody had taken care of it. So white cemeteries don't look like that. They're not kind of forgotten and unmarked and unmaintained. So, that I thought was going to be a way to honor Dr. King. And it ended up kind of breaking my twins' hearts a little bit when I had to back it up and explain.
I'm going to throw out, like, a few different examples and then let you run with whatever is on your heart. Examples of, oh, Well, that had not occurred to me, or that's not something that we ran across with our kids who are white. Uh, the River Monitors might recall I turned 40 when I was here, and Anna came up and preached on my birthday, actually, my birthday weekend, and so all their four kids were here, and twins were here, and one of the twins is especially uh, perceptive and has questions, and she wanted to know why black balloons were funny, uh, and
Black balloons, and she was like, why is everybody like, ah ha ha, black balloons? Why is that so funny? When you say, well, because it represents death, that that doesn't help, right?
right. Um, uh, and then the lesson, like how the impact of the first lesson about slavery and children being separated. Most people won't have had a chance to watch the video about the angels. I think that's definitely something worth sharing, and I can throw it up on the screen share. Um, but when one way, one thing that makes me really sad about it is like we were like very much, I feel like, and you know advocating for a less racist society, and spoke up in times when things were said that were racist, and then uh, but the impact of those sorts of comments uh, you uh, tripled, or increased when you adopted the girls, because now it was family, and that's wrong. Um, the As like brothers and sister siblings in Christ, it shouldn't matter whether it's your genetic family members. Racism hurts people regardless of whether you're related to them. But now when I see Confederate flags, I always got that it was not heritage. I remember arguing in Mr. Freeman's classic where you had to choose a side about taking it down, but now it's like, should I go to that farm and help that person take that down? Um, so I don't know. That's just as a framework about theologically what we shouldn't wait for everybody to have to have black children, just like we shouldn't have to wait for everybody to have a gay child for us to recognize the pain that we inflict on people by simply being mostly quiet. But
But
you talk.
I think it has been humbling for me as someone who saw themselves as progressive, who was raised by parents who were progressive, whose dad had a Quaker background. I considered myself to have done some work in this area, and I had. But I think part of it is, adopting the twins. I think part of it's what is happening culturally. Also, is we are all becoming more aware of things. Um,
Hmm.
it's not just because it's in our family. I think there's a ripple effect of it coming out of being my children, but I think there's also just larger change coming. Like, yeah, I've I've learned a lot. Some of it I've had to because they're my children. So like, I had a sense once they started public school that they were going to learn about slavery in a classroom. And I wanted them to hear about that from us before they heard sitting in a classroom with mostly white peers about this thing that was going to feel personal. Um, and so I had to kind of catch up and get ahead, because the way the curriculum starts, at least in Georgia, because we live in Georgia, they start by teaching about the civil rights movement, which I get, because that's kind of a victory lap. Like, I can see why you want to start there, because it's when it seemed like it got fixed. But it leaves a gap on, well, why weren't they equal? Why did they have to fight for rights? Like, the kids know there's a piece missing, you know? So I had to figure out how to talk to them about slavery as a white person. um, and one of the ways I did that, this is quirky, but it worked for me, was to, it seemed kind of similar to me to how Jewish people talk to their children about the Holocaust. That they wanted to hear it at home first, and it was information they were going to need. And so I asked, I mean, I didn't do it as soon as I met people who were Jewish, but I waited, but I didn't necessarily know them very well. When I would be like, so I need to ask you a question. How did your parents tell you about the Holocaust? And usually people, I mean, I come across as, I need a lot of help, I think. So people are usually really open to helping and saying, this is what was helpful to me, because to act like they could just learn it at school seemed unkind to me. But there were other things that I didn't know about that I missed. So Katie learned last year about the Birmingham Children's Crusade at school. And I had heard of that, but I didn't really understand it. I thought it was kind of a children's movement. I didn't really understand that that these children were harmed, and that it was a turning point in the civil rights movement. And Katie learned at school that they turned fire hoses on children and some of their skin came off, and she had nightmares. And of course she did. Of course, the kids looked like her. But it wasn't something that I learned about it through her. So I'm not delusional enough to think I can get out ahead of everything that's going to come their way. Because I don't have the background, and I need a lot of help from people of color who can guide them through this in ways that I can't. I haven't been there. I don't know what that's like to walk through the world that way. Oh, I can't hear you.
It's recorded. Segue from that is this wanting to protect them, to keep them in this bubble, and knowing that you can't anymore, which is a conversation we've been having over the last year. And as they get older, the access to information that they have will be even more than the school, and it's horrible out there. There's things that there was the young teenage African American girl. They had been at a pool party, and she just got slung around and thrown to the ground. I have never seen a video of that, of a white girl, and that was an example of one that just I felt like it was happening to the twins, and you can't prepare a child for that, but every now and then, if you could tap into so this can't just be Anna and Brian and your other kids, or just their aunts and uncles and grandparents. Like, how does a community begin to um, you maybe using the nurturing our children in the faith baptismal promises, and that having that obligation regardless of the person's actual church that they're in. Just I know that's a lot, but to think about, where have you seen it done well, and more often than not, where it's like, okay, well, they didn't really make space for half of my kids. Is that a good enough? Can you go from there?
A little bit. One of the things that I struggle with is I don't want it to just be about my children. And I think that's what you're saying too. So I don't want my kids to be a mascot for white institutions that now we're going to do better because of it. Because that's a lot to put on 12-year-olds. It's too much. So I think, if knowing our family inspires people to pay more attention, that's great. But my kids can't carry that because, again, they're 12. So I have noticed a shift like in our community, and I've noticed a shift in my older children around Black Lives Matter that there just seems to be a ripple effect that's broadening that I appreciate. And I haven't had my twins participate in protests and marches. I've asked them if they want to, and they have been unsure. So it seemed like the kind of thing that my 18 and 19-year-olds and I could do on their behalf. Mm. I know there's plenty of people who have taken their children, and I think it just depends family to family. I've struggled when I talk to them. I tell them when incidents have happened, because I also know they're going to hear about them. And you're right, they're older. They can see things more online. Mm. So like Ahmaud Arbery, that was in Georgia, that wasn't law enforcement. So in some ways that was easier to talk to them about than George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, because one of my kids is really interested, Katie's really interested in going into law enforcement. And, I break her heart in a different way when I tell her about that. And, so much of what I've learned and understood that when I need to talk to them about safety with police officers, has been along the lines of don't run, never run. I've tried to boil it down to be as clear and concise. Get home safely, don't run. Well, a lot of the incidents recently, nobody's been running, so that doesn't feel as useful now. And I haven't figured out what's next.
I want to invite people, if they have a question, to message me privately in the chat, and then if we have time, I think it would be easier for people to send me a question. We didn't do that the last one, and I kind of wish we had. And that also means that I'll only pick the really hard ones. I'm just kidding. Will you talk about the angels, because that was, I think, eye-opening for all of us, and I'll share the screen once you get into that story, and so they can see the painting we're talking about.
Sure. So when my twins were 7, my husband was reading them from the Children's Bible, and one of them asked, why do they all have blonde hair? And, this was just a Protestant Bible. This wasn't specifically a Bible for white families. But my husband was flipping through. He was like, they don't all know, he was looking through, and they definitely in that book did. So he called me in because he was like, oh, you went to seminary. I think you can handle this. And as I looked through other Bibles in our household, in our Christmas books, and everything that might have angels, blonde across the board. And I had never noticed it before. And we have so many books about, I love my hair, and about my, my skin, and adoptive families, and just all this really empowering children's literature. But it was the children's Bible that was making my child feel excluded from the message. So in the middle of the night, I had ordered some new Bibles, some that were more intentional. And I was up thinking about how we could make this better, I think, for them. And I remembered a local artist who did paintings of angels, kind of like in a folk style. And the next morning, I didn't email her in the middle of the night. The next morning, I got in touch with her and asked her if she would be open to painting some angels for our family's house. And, you know, if I needed them to be angels of color, that we needed that representation in our household. And she was really open to it. And she, we had some back and forth that was really interesting about like their hair, you know, what should we do hair wise? And I had intended to put them in their rooms, like above their beds. But once I saw them, I really felt like our whole family needed to look at them daily, that we needed to look at these paintings, because we know that representation matters. And we know that mirrors matter. We know that what's coming back at you helps you to see who you are. And so they're above our kitchen table. And one thing that's been interesting has been my older kids' friends, who are mostly white, when they come in and they're like, oh, wow, I've never seen anything like that. It kind of gives us all a little bit of pause of why we haven't. So I think, you know, that idea of mirrors and representation is something people talk a lot about in education. I just hadn't really thought about it very much in church. I do now. I have made a shift there on who's in leadership matters. I told Clay that we were at a Montreat conference, an anti-racism conference. So those of us sitting out in the auditorium, you know, were in regular clothes, and everybody up on the stage was dressed up, and all the leadership was African-American. And Katie had said, they're just all so dressed up. And we had been to African-American churches before, but I think everybody was dressed up. But this was a feeling of what she was trying to articulate was those people on the stage, they're African-American, are in charge of this. And she had not seen that. You know, we had people in her life, but they weren't necessarily her principal at her school. They weren't the people who were in charge. And that has stuck with me and been important as they move into their teenage years. So intentionally, their pediatrician now is an African-American woman. Like, I've tried to find places where, because it is empowering. It's important.
You just kind of mentioned it, but we talk about one of the first times, or there was a time where you might have just had Elizabeth with you, but you went to a predominantly Black church, and it was like she was like, "Oh my gosh!"
Oh yeah, because they it was a small African American church, a Presbyterian congregation, about an hour from our house that we sometimes visit, and they said, if we have any visitors here, which it was clearly us, like we were the only white people there, there were like, any visitors here that would like to introduce themselves. And I was like, I think that's us. I think it was just Caleb and Elizabeth and I that day. And I stood up and said, you know, who I was, and introduced Elizabeth, and, you know, thanked them for welcoming us to their congregation. And right away, the woman doing the announcement said, "Thank you, and we would like to welcome Elizabeth's family." And I was kind of like, I'm the mom. like it was, I'm not used to being introduced in that kind of setting because of who my child is. Like, it was, but she was very clear that we were there with Elizabeth, and it was Elizabeth's family that was there. And I have to say, Elizabeth kind of sat up a little bit taller. She was like, "Thank you for the introduction." Because I do think I have noticed in multiple situations People will notice my girls first. Other African Americans will notice my girls first before they notice me. And they see them and claim them in a way, and then figure out what to do with me. Like one time, this is a good example. We were at a church in Chicago visiting some friends, and we were hot and everybody was itchy and stuffy. It was wintertime, and Katie just already had it, and it was only 10:30. And she kind of like laid out in the fellowship hall on a bench. And a woman came through that was like work security in the church. And she was African American, and she looked at Katie, and then she looked at me and she said, "Is she okay?" And I said, "Yes, she's fine. She's just having a morning." Because I think she wanted to make sure she wasn't physically hurt in any way. And she turned from me and was right up on Katie. It was like, "You need to sit up. That's not how we act in this place." And Katie shot straight up. I felt like she asked my permission by asking if she was okay, but I also think she saw a misbehaving young Black girl who couldn't act like that.
Yeah, and the rules are different. Joy, who the conversation was with last week, we talked a good bit about that, where you have to be perfect to even begin to be treated with dignity. Uh, um, there's one question. I think it's a layered question, so we could spend a bunch of time there. But I think it's a good for people to be familiar with. I, I think I know where you'll go with it. So someone asked why, and you might have asked African Americans about how they talked to their children about slavery as well. But what moved you towards talking to your Jewish acquaintances, friends about the Holocaust, as opposed to talking more just with or solely with people who were Black, raising Black kids?
I think because, and I did, but I think what I understood was there was never an official coming in to have a talk about this within a Black family. I feel like it was so woven into the tapestry of their daily lives.
Oh,
They did not have to introduce this new thing. They didn't have to break it to their children in the same way that I needed to, because mine had been more protected. I mean, it comes from a place of privilege in some ways, and also just, they had adopted in some ways our family's narrative. So one of the reasons that I thought to ask people who were Jewish was Steve Montgomery, who recently passed away in Memphis. When I worked at my first church with him, I remember him saying a rabbi friend had told him that, within their families, they talk about how are we going to tell the kids? When are we going to tell the kids? When are we going to have a talk with them? And he said in Protestant families, he thinks that's usually about sex. Like, when are we going to talk to our kids about this? But in Jewish families, they're like, no, that's not the thing we need to talk about. What we need to talk about is this. And so I think that's where I had the idea that might be a helpful group to turn to, because it wasn't within the context of, I was telling it as an outsider in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, all this is, again and again, it's like, oh yeah, but it just shows how naive I am, and I think most of us are about what it's like to be Black in America, right? So that talk isn't as formulated, or we're going to have that talk because it's also we need you to know early on your great grandmother was a slave. It's still not that long ago. Hey, I want to glance on because I haven't even mentioned Austin Chaney Brown's part where she says, "I'm not impressed that we've just begun to hit the mark of just basic human decency." Like people want to celebrate our achievements. Like, we don't enslave people and separate them from their families and rape them and treat them like animals. We've made progress. And she's like, I'm not sure that's progress. Um, so, uh, how did that go over when you read that part of Brown's book?
I think it felt convicting. I think there were multiple things about her book that felt very convicting to me. And um, I when we adopted the twins and then, moving into it was 2008. So Obama was elected, inaugurated. I put them in these little chairs in front of the TV to watch the inauguration, even though they were like less than a year old. Like it felt like a time where we had made some progress that I was eager to celebrate. And I think some of that is just wanting to leave some of the hurt behind. And so it felt like for a little stretch there, we could focus on the progress. And then after the Trump election, I think I felt gut punched in a sense of, I thought we had handled some things as a nation. I thought some things were taken care of. And as rhetoric changed, I felt like, okay, we're not where I thought we were with race.
I don't know that I've heard anybody else articulate it the way you did, and I was like, maybe you got it from somebody else, but I was like, it wasn't so much that we're living in this like twilight zone now. It was that those 8 years weren't really representative of where America's at, and this is clearly, if people are paying, this is so much bigger than this current administration. It's not. He didn't bring back racism. Do you remember that about? I don't know if you used it like Twilight Zone language, but do you remember that where you're like, oh yeah, no, that was what wasn't really us yet.
Mm-hmm. It feels so long ago that those were, my girls would get really excited about watching the Obama family, and we paid attention to what Michelle was doing with her hair. It just was a different time. So they're both real. They're both real, and both indicative of who we are as a nation. But that was easier. And my kids are older now, and they can hear things they didn't hear before. And I think with progress, I'm hesitant because I have a lot of privilege, and I know that I want to see things as better because I'm scared for my children. So I'm really quick to be like, but that's something, that's something. Can we celebrate that as something? And I'm not sure I get to decide. I'm pretty sure I don't get to be the one to decide whether something counts enough or not as progress. Like a tiny example, which I'm sure Austin Channing Brown would not be impressed by, but was a young woman that I know she's in a sorority, and somebody was coming through Rush who was African American. And some people in her sorority were saying, we just don't think she'd be comfortable here. We just don't, we don't think our sorority is a good fit for her because we don't think she would be comfortable. And this young woman said, I thought of Katie and Elizabeth, and I thought, well, if they weren't comfortable, they wouldn't be going through this process. So she said, I was able to say to my peers, I think we're the ones who are uncomfortable.
Yeah. Right.
I think she's perfectly comfortable coming into this room, or this is voluntary. Nobody's making her do this. But yeah, I don't think Austin Channing Brown would see that as much progress that some white sorority girls might have had a glimpse of their own, discomfort.
I definitely think we prefer a narrative that shows great progress, right? Because that absolves us of culpability as well as any need to repent.
Right.
Like Black clergy friends, one of the things that pains them most, uh, uh, or that recur, like that I hear a lot, is that there's never been a real ownership. It's of the sin of this country, and uh, you know, conversations about reparations are like, uh, you know, a you they just get shut down right away. But my goodness, if we haven't really moved into repentance, that's got to happen before reparations, or at least coincide. Um,
And I
and
think,
reconciliation can't happen
yeah.
until those things happen.
And I don't expect that from our government. I think the leadership on that, regardless of who's president, I think the leadership for that is coming from other institutions, colleges and universities and seminaries and churches. I feel like, I think that's going to push us where we should be going with that, because that's where I'm seeing it. I can remember even, and we're probably about out of time, aren't we? I can remember 25 years ago, one of our seminary professors talking about some part of the endowment for Columbia Seminary was from people who had sold land and property in order to endow the seminary. And as he was talking, he was getting like weepy, and he shared the property that was sold and read a list of names of enslaved people that were sold, and the money given as an endowment to the seminary that we attended. And I think using those names was, I mean, this was 25 years ago, right? The names, that matters. And I think it was a way for the school to start to recognize their part in that narrative. Calling it property and reading names are entirely different things.
Yeah, one thing I'm kind of tuning into is about narrative and who controls the narrative, and partly with this information age, there's more narratives out there, right? Where competing narratives now, and one of the things that I'm finding really interesting is that white people, many of us, don't like some of the terms, and so it's like, do we have to say white fragility? Do we have? Why can't we say white advantage? Which actually I started using because it's like, if that helps people, like we know that there's some disadvantages to growing up black in America. Like people are like, therefore, it's advantageous. But it's like, really, we can't stomach white privilege, like because it's off-putting. We want to be in charge of how successful the civil rights movement was, and how we talk about race and the terms. And now there's, it's like, hey, guess what? Everybody is racist. Like that, it was kind of a joke in the Broadway play Avenue Q, but now it's like there's a need for ownership of this, and it's not just people with pointy hoods. That it is ingrained in our society, as well as in our minds, how we think about who is of more value.
And I think, yeah, that understanding of the continuum of it is really, you have to be open to it. Like I have a friend whose husband is African American and she's white, and I can remember her saying a couple years ago, if one more person calls him articulate to me, I'm going to lose it. He's a law professor. Of course he but the idea, when you say that an African American man is articulate, you're saying you're surprised. You're saying that's not the norm. Or you wouldn't need to point it out. So there's so many things that I have to unlearn that I don't even know are in there. Don't you have church soon?
Yeah, but the guy that's preaching I don't think anybody's going to go, so we can just keep going. Um, I know my fam. No, no, we normally go right up. Let's see.
I'm the oldest. I'm like, don't you have somewhere you're supposed to be? I'm a little nervous.
Yeah, you're right. How about you? You do you. Um,
Okay, fine.
so the Perrys, Alden and Caroline are on here. Uh, that's Alicia Perry Food's parents. And they, you can answer either one of these. One is what, um, where, like, so one of my things, like, I actually put on my business card, like, hold fast to what is good.
Hmm.
And so that's still, eat, we still have to do that without, that's not rose-colored lenses. So her question is along those lines, kind of stuff. What makes the twins happiest right now, and you as well? And this is this has been hell,
Mhm.
2020, and especially for Black people, disproportionately affected by the pandemic and the amount of violence against people of color. So, where is their happiness in the MacArthur homestead?
Where is their joy? I
Yeah.
think one, one unexpected um, surprise of being 12 is that a lot of times it's all about you. So as any 12 to 19-year-old, that those teen years. So I think they have not fully absorbed what is happening in our larger culture, because they want more screen time and they want to know which of their friends they'll get to see at school, the stuff that is typical of every 12-year-old.
Mm,
But I also think they both are. Elizabeth is reading a ton, and any books I can get my hands on about young women of color. She just read one called Blended that she loved. I mean, I feel like she's trying to figure this out through fiction in a lot
hmm.
of ways. Um, Katie is working on developing her style, she says, and it involves sweatsuits and chains. So we're trying to figure that out. She's kind of trying to move into a new aesthetic. Um, yeah. So they're being 12.
Hey, two things. One, the I don't know if you said the artist, but some of these people might know the artist from the angel painting.
Yeah. So her name is Jackie Kershey, and she grew up in Chattanooga. Um, and I'll have to look up and see what her maiden name was.
Okay. And let's see. Yeah. I'll give you just anything else that you want to share. I I just don't know how the church, on the one hand, honors that. I I just think we have to. It's almost like uh, 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 dialectical thinking. I was trying to think of a word that people actually use besides dialectical thinking, but affirming that you can't just look past blackness or whiteness, that it's different, and then reading Galatians 3:28, that yes, this is a huge part of who you are, but in the end, it's like we're children of God, right?
Social
Who,
construct. Yeah.
who are you? I'm a child of God, and so uh, it's just like I have plenty of gay friends. They're like, I'm I'm John. I'm not gay John.
Right.
And it's like all the same thing, but still honoring the other. I don't know how
Well,
can.
I think, yeah, that's why I think I was trying to say when I'm saying they're still just 12-year-olds. I think we have to, I regret that I didn't feel like I had skin in the game until my children had different skin than me. Like I feel like I was late and slow coming to this. And I think if we can all move towards um, claiming one another and one another's children, I think we'll be at a different place. So, like at that same church that introduced Elizabeth, another time we were leaving, and this woman came across the parking lot to us, and And she said, I just want to thank you for raising our girls. And to me, that was baptism. She had never met us. And she had plenty of reasons to not be sure about us. One, we weren't staying for lunch because my kids were over it. So that was a strike against us. But when she said raising our girls, that claiming was to me what the church promises in baptism. Can we end there? I love you.
Yeah, the whole thing.
But also, you're a part of that.
It's just painful.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you imagine you're gonna go sleep like for the rest of the day. It's exhausting. And then we think about, like, like when I mean, it's everywhere. If you're doing a good bit of reading on race right now, where it's like y'all have to do the work because
Yes.
we can't. And then you just think about like that 50-minute conversation. It was just like, okay, we got through it.
Right. But that is every day of people's lives. And that is
Yeah.
why I can send you some links of people that I follow online, because I think it's generous of African American writers and bloggers to let us listen in. And I think we can learn a lot without them having to take time to one-on-one instruct us. That's too much time.
Right.
I think if we can follow them as authors and writers and speakers, we can learn a lot without, my goodness, this is ours to learn and figure out. This is not their responsibility. So I always see it as generous and kind if they let us listen in.
Somebody actually wrote that, not as a question, but it's like, yeah, this is on us. To get to it. It's interesting because it's the same, what I was describing as dialectical. It's the same dichotomy of, it's important to talk about the issues that face people of color, and then when it's like your loved ones, it's like, this is like, these aren't, it's not issues, and these aren't like how to resolve racism children, and so trying to like honor the blackness, and that actually has like some differences, and then still honor like, but that's not who they are in the end, that we're children of God. Anyways, people need to get onto a different link, and
thanks for having me.
They're applauding. There's a couple of thumbs down.
Is that from Miles? Is that our other brother?
Yeah, right. No, she's amazing, right? She's not open to a call, so just know that.
No, got my hands full. True.
Yeah.
All
right, love y'all. I'm gonna go to worship.
Okay, bye guys.
I'll send you the link, Anna.
Okay, yeah, I'll share it if I can figure it out.
No,
okay.
I meant to worship.
Oh, worship. Oh no, I'm done. Thanks though.